What's up everyone, Thralls here once again. I'm Necrotic Nick and I have an album review for you. So another one that I had my eye on because I think it's an up and coming band out there was the newest offering from Conjurer, Pathos. This comes out also on the 1st of July on Nuclear Blast Records. This is their second album overall. This is their debut on Nuclear Blast, so way to go on getting on a bigger label. This band formed in 2014 in the UK, and this band is a really interesting mix of a lot of different things. You have post-metal, sludge metal, I would say there's bits of hardcore, metalcore, and maybe even some death metal and black metal all in here. And this band also features bassist Connor Marshall of Silosis and drummer Jan Kraus of Esoteric, at least up until this year. Jan Kraus actually left recently and they have a new drummer now. Now I've been following this band since their debut full-length Meyer. It pretty much came up on a list on a website of like the best albums of, I think it was 2018, that weren't getting a lot of press, and I checked it out and I ended up really liking it. And at this point, they kind of reminded me a lot of like a much more doom-laden version of Mastodon circa Remission. Now I love that album and I love Doom, so naturally this album definitely grabbed me. I think we actually might have had it in our first year-end list. I'm not entirely sure. It might have come out in 2017. Again, this was kind of the early years of the channel, so a little fuzzy there. But I've been waiting with anticipation to hear a follow-up to that album because I thought it was really good. And when I started hearing tracks for this come out, it was like, all right, let's see what this band's all about. There's been a fair amount of time in between releases. You're on a bigger label now. Let's see what we got. And this album, I think, is quite a bit broader in the spectrum. Like, first off, the production on here, absolutely huge. The drums sound like fucking cannon fire. It's some of the most massive sounding drum production I think I've actually heard here recently. Like literally every time the snare goes off, I'm checking outside just to make sure there aren't shots fired. The guitars are dense, thick. The bass brings in this giant low end, and this is definitely a lot more lush and atmospheric when it's called for. This band's style is kind of all over the place. Like it shifts dynamics quite abruptly sometimes. It can shift in an instant from like the most blisteringly heavy breakdowns to the most soft, introspective, ambient moments in a fucking heartbeat. And granted, I think that's something that's on Meyer as well, but I think it's done more efficiently here and there's just more to it. Like this is just a bigger sounding album overall. The opening track, It Dwells, opens up with like a post-metal like ambience, like dissonant tritones, and it's kind of slowly building in energy. But you think it's going to be more of a, you know, slower shift in the song, and then boom, it just explodes. And when these songs explode, holy shit, they're heavy. And then when you're throwing on these layered vocals, which there are two vocalists on here, and they both sound anguished and tortured, just maybe in different registers, because you have one that is decidedly lower, and then the other one is more of a piercing hardcore scream versus a bellow. But it's how they bounce off of each other and work together to actually create these really just tortured sounding fucking growls that's all over this sludgy, cathartic listen. And there's a lot of genre weaving on here, at least in terms of like subgenres of metal. Like this can start off sounding more like post-metal, like Cult of Luna or Isis, get into some sludgy territory like Inter Arma, and then all of a sudden you're going into more hardcore slash metalcore breakdowns, kind of like Norma Jean or Converge, or maybe even some early Cave-In in there. And the riff construction is kind of a big part on there because they like to kind of just go all over the place. Like you get like distant hardcore squeals, more of that like ambient guitar sort of stuff that you'd hear in, you know, again, more post-metal stuff, and then just bottom heavy destructive breakdowns left and right. But when they're at their heaviest, they can go a lot of different directions. Like in the song Basilisk, there are some flat out death metal slash death doom moments in there, but those play off of moments that are a little bit more hardcore oriented as well. And then of course you have like this post-metal atmosphere in between. And the overall effect, and kind of the overall effect of the album, are these very long but very meticulously crafted songs that are essentially like dark emotional journeys. There are 4 tracks on here over the 7-minute mark, and honestly they don't really lag very much. There's a lot of cool dynamic shifts to keep them interesting. It's kind of like if the words depressive and oppressive were people and they were holding hands skipping through a field of broken glass. It's pretty much depressive music and oppressive music kind of just interlocking and just making sure you are beaten down by the weight of life at all times. because this album does not pull any punches, and it might be wearing brass knuckles or maybe swinging a hammer at you. Like, this is just giant size, dark fucking heaviness. But luckily I like that kind of shit. And I like what they do with the atmosphere on here too, like in terms of like leading in songs and kind of luring you into a certain sound. The opening to the track Rot, which I think is one of the heaviest tracks, but again, another giant journey of a song. It opens up with these very clean guitars, but they're playing a very dissonant, somber melody, and there's ambient noise in the background. And it's interesting that I bring up how loud the drums are and how fucking powerful they are. Well, they're very subdued. They're very muffled and sort of in the background in here, and there's a sort of steady build until the song finally fucking explodes, and then Jesus Christ, the song gets stupid heavy. There are giant size breakdowns on here. Like, if you were a breakdown fiend, you're gonna hear some ridiculously heavy breakdowns, especially in the song Rot, where they're kind of more doom-laden, and I think the riffs are a little bit more angular and kind of crawling all over the place. And then flat out just percussive heaviness at the end of Basilisk. Probably the heaviest moment on this entire album. They even do a giant sort of group vocal thing, just isolated before the weight of the world comes crashing down in the form of a riff right into your eardrums. And that's kind of the nature of this album. Like, when it is heavy, it is generally earth-shattering heavy. But when it's softer, it's very light and airy, but it's a very like depressive wind that's blowing through at the time. Like, again, this isn't like feel-good music, this is cathartic. And no matter what, there's like an emotional heaviness to just about every single moment on here. But again, those giant shifts, and I think that post-metal atmosphere is kind of a really interesting setup for a lot of the heavier moments. It definitely has the vibe of, again, like early ISIS. Honestly, if you had told me Aaron Turner was on here, I probably would have believed you. Now, something that I think stands out on this album versus their debut is there's definitely a bit more melody on here. They actually explore some clean vocals and more just straightforward hooks. Like, it's not always angular, it's not always like a odd time signature breakdown. There's some like legit, really good melodic hooks on here. All You'll Remember is probably one of the most interesting tracks in there, where there's actually clean vocals. There are weird pivots between like sort of shoegazy atmosphere, almost funeral doom, sort of lumbering sludge, and creepy whispers. There are sections where they're just these breathy whispers like a fucking EVP in a fucking ghost show. And actually they even go a little bit further on the last track, Cracks in the Pyre, where they add this pulsating effect to the whispers on this very clean opening with waves and such, and it just sounds like that beach is haunted and you shouldn't be there. But back to All You Can Remember, this song is definitely more melodic, and I like the shoegaziness, though I think towards the end it gets a little Deaf Heaven-y. I'm not the biggest fan of that, but the big shoegazy strummed riffs, the blast beats, it kind of has like a little bit of black gaze in there, but it does get back to the sludgier roots of their sound, and honestly, it comes across as one of the most experimental tracks on here. Another one in terms of like showing more melody this time is Those Years Condemned. This one, I was surprised, it actually kind of sounds like early Opeth, like My Arms, Your Hearse era Opeth, except played through a sludge filter, which sounds like a weird term because I just don't feel like you can filter much through sludge. But it's there. And it does have like a little bit of hardcore flair to it, so it's almost like a collaboration between like Botch and Opeth, which I kind of actually would like to see that, but Botch actually has to be around for that. But I think there's like an added sort of progressive flair to their music this time. Like, they definitely reached out, they definitely brought in a lot of different influences on here, and this makes for a much more in-depth album than Meyer was. Meyer, I think, is just flat out crushing and a giant emotional journey. This is that, but on a grander scale, I think. There isn't a moment on here that isn't just overflowing with an outpouring of emotion. And generally, the emotions are pretty dark. Even in its most quiet moments, it still sounds intense with just maybe trying to hold back tears, yells, screams. And a lot of this is about building the mood and building the atmosphere, but there are moments in here where this band just says, fuck it, let's go. The song Suffer Alone, when I actually looked at it in terms of the track lengths, I saw it was 2 minutes and 33 seconds. Like, okay, here's the interlude that I'm going to bitch about. Like, it's going to be, you know, pleasantly melodic, and it'll just seem overly unnecessary, and I'll bitch about it. Here I am, very fucking wrong. This song is a Converge-inspired fucking barn burner. Easily the fastest and most aggressive track on here. And this is probably the biggest break from the rest of the album. The rest of the album has more of a uniform sound. This song just says, fuck it. This is like the equivalent of a fucking defiant boarding school kid that's forced to wear the fucking uniform and all that bullshit, putting a Slayer pin on the jacket and just say, you know what, I'm gonna wear this. I don't even give a shit if I get detention. This one small bit is fucking worth it. And that isn't to say this album is rigid or follows a formula or anything like that, but it does have a particular sound on it, and this one song does not fucking care about that one particular sound. It just goes for the throat. In terms of like any negatives I would have about this, I think it does run a little bit long. Like it's just a bit over 50 minutes, but there are sections that do run long. And part of that is sort of due to the style because granted, I like what they do and I think it's very creative, but they do a lot of the same stuff on a lot of the same tracks. Like in terms of the giant jarring shifts and dynamics and changes in style, the giant riffs to quiet moments, the atmosphere, it's all really good, but sometimes I feel like there are some parts that could be cut down a little bit. And the fact that most of the songs kind of open the same way. There are a couple that don't necessarily open up with like a clean setup intro, like Suffer Alone and In Your Wake. Those get right to the point probably a little bit quicker than others. And honestly, it was kind of a nice break, but I kind of got tired of that, you know, dismal, clean intro into giant heavy riffs. Like I love that formula, but when it's repeated a lot, you know, it kind of got a little bit old. But overall, I really enjoyed this. Even with, you know, what negatives I could actually find in here, which aren't really big ones, this was a really, I guess, enjoyable listen. I mean, it's very dark, it's very dismal, it's very cathartic, but I enjoyed it. Like, this is a really good outlet for a lot of, like, negative emotions that you can just sit back and listen to this and sort of kind of relate with it. Again, that whole cathartic thing. And I like albums that do that. And I like albums that have really good shifts like that so I can get all the brutality I want and maybe a little bit of clean prettiness if I choose. So overall, I'm gonna give this 4 stars. This is a solid album. I'm not sure if this is as good as Meyer. I do really love that album, but I think this is a pretty fucking incredible album. I think there's definitely more to it in terms of the atmosphere. I think while I can say this is them at their heaviest, because this is a fucking heavy album, this is also them really expanding out in terms of melodies and hooks, and for as brutal and fucking just dark and oppressive as this is very catchy. And I think a really cool thing about this one is it appeals to a lot of different fan bases. Like the fans of sludge metal, I think will definitely get this. If you're a fan of metalcore and hardcore, I think there's a lot of stuff in here you'll probably dig. If you like death metal, it has that level of heaviness. There's a little bit of black metal atmosphere. There's post-metal all the fuck over this. So, I mean, if you love like Neurosis and Cult of Luna, you're probably gonna dig the shit out of this too. And the beauty of it is it doesn't sound like it's trying to appease all of those groups and like, oh, we gotta have a little bit of this for those fans and those fans. This sounds like a uniform, just nasty blend of dark, brooding, heavy, sludgy nastiness. For lack of a more eloquent description, I think that's pretty fucking accurate. But yeah, if you love any of the things that I brought up, I recommend checking this out. Check out their first album too. Check out their debut EP. It's fucking also awesome. But yeah, if this is your first time ever hearing this band, I recommend checking this out. And again, go check out their other stuff too. It's amazing. And go see them live because holy shit, they bring it live. So if you enjoyed this review, give it a thumbs up, and if you're new to the channel, subscribe because we do stuff like this all the time. We are also on Patreon. If you'd like to help us out there, there'll be a link down below. There'll also be a link down there to thrallsmetal.com where you can get one of our kick-ass shirts. Also, we will be making some announcements here relatively soon about Denver Death Fest in terms of lineups and such. And well, I mean, it's definitely starting to gain some traction, and I think you guys will be pleased with some of the bands we have on this. But yeah, that will take place September 30th through October 2nd in Denver, Colorado, because it's Denver Death Fest, so that's where it's going to take place. And we are pretty fucking excited about it, and we're looking forward to seeing you guys there. It should be a blast. And of course, we will keep you informed as to any announcements, updates, anything about the fest. But yeah, it's going to be a blast. And of course, as always, thank you so much for liking, subscribing, following, any of that shit. We appreciate the fuck out of you guys. It's been an amazing ride so far. We're looking forward to throwing out more content. We're going to get working on the Pantera ranking. I'm pretty sure that'll be a lot of fun, but thank you guys from the bottom of my black heart and all of our black hearts, because that's a condition we have. And of course, we will catch you later.